The cafe still smelled the same after all these years, warm coffee, old wood, and memories that refused to fade. I stood outside for a long moment, watching people pass by, strangers living lives that did not include me anymore. But this place, this table, this promise, it was still mine, even if the person who made it had forgotten. I pushed the door open, and the bell rang softly just like it always had, and for a second I almost expected him to look up from the corner table, smile, and wave like he used to do when we were younger, when time felt endless and hope felt permanent. But the chair was empty, and it always had been every year except the first. We were 17 when we made the promise. It felt silly then, like something out of a movie. Two friends sitting across from each other, sharing fries and dreams, promising that no matter what happened, no matter where life took us, we would meet here on the same day every year, just to prove that we still remembered each other, just to prove that some things could survive change. He laughed and said, "Of course I will be here, how could I ever forget you?" And I believed him, because at that age belief comes easily, and doubt has not learned how to speak yet. The first year he came late, breathless, apologizing, saying traffic was bad, laughing as he slid into the seat, and we talked for hours about college, new friends, new fears, new versions of ourselves. It felt like nothing had changed. The second year he came even later, phone buzzing, excuses spilling out, but he still came, and I told myself that was what mattered. The third year he sent a message saying he was stuck at work, but he would come tomorrow, and tomorrow never came. I sat there anyway, stirring my coffee until it went cold, telling myself maybe something important had happened, maybe life had simply gotten loud and crowded, and my name had been pushed to the back of his mind. But next year would be different, it always would be different next year. But next year he forgot again, and again, and again. Each year I came anyway, sitting at the same table, ordering the same drink, leaving at sunset with the same quiet ache in my chest, telling myself that showing up still mattered, even if I was the only one doing it, because promises, even forgotten ones, deserve to be honored. People say you should let go of those who let go of you, but nobody tells you how. Nobody explains how you stop caring about someone who once knew your thoughts before you spoke them, how you erase laughter that still echoes when you close your eyes, how you move on when part of you is still waiting in a cafe that smells like memory. Years passed and life kept moving forward without asking if I was ready. I built routines, learned how to smile on cue, learned how to say I'm fine when I'm not, learned how to turn absence into something manageable. But every year on the same date my feet carried me back to that cafe, like muscle memory, like my body remembered what my heart refused to forget. Sometimes I imagined him walking in, older, tired, maybe surprised to see me still there, maybe apologizing, maybe explaining everything. And in those moments I practiced forgiveness in my head. I practiced saying it's okay, I've been fine, I've been living, I've been waiting. And sometimes I imagined him walking past the window, not seeing me at all, and that hurt more than any apology could ever heal. People came and went in my life, coworkers, neighbors, strangers who became friends, and friends who slowly faded, but none of them knew about the promise. None of them knew about this day, this table, this quiet ritual of hope. They only saw me as someone who liked coffee and silence, someone who seemed calm and steady, someone who never talked about the past. But the past talked to me constantly. It whispered every time I heard his favorite song, every time I laughed the way I used to laugh with him, every time I passed a place we once stood together, wondering who we would become. On the 10th year I almost didn't go. I stood in my apartment holding my coat, staring at the door, arguing with myself, telling myself this was pointless, childish, even, but something inside me, softer and stubborn, said just one more time, if only to say goodbye properly, if only to prove that I kept my word, even if he never did. The cafe was quieter that day. Rain tapped gently against the windows, and the barista smiled at me like she recognized me, though I wasn't sure if she did, or if she was just kind. I sat down, hands wrapped around a warm cup, heart heavy but strangely calm, as if I already knew what the ending would be. I waited. Minutes passed, then an hour. And just as I stood up ready to leave for the last time, I noticed something on the table, something that had not been there before, a folded piece of paper, simple, worn, edges creased like it had been opened and closed many times. My name was written on it. My breath caught, my fingers trembled as I picked it up, unfolding it slowly, afraid of what it might say, afraid of what it might mean, afraid that hope would hurt more than certainty. The note was short but heavy. It said, I waited for you for 10 years and now am moving on. For a moment the room spun, the words blurred, tears filled my eyes, not because he had forgotten, but because he remembered, because somewhere, somehow he had been coming to, sitting alone, waiting, wondering why I never showed up, believing I was the one who broke the promise. I sank back into the chair, heart racing, mind unraveling, memories twisting into new shapes. Every missed year, every excuse, every silence suddenly had another side, another story, another pain. We had both been waiting. We had both been hurting. And neither of us ever asked why. I don't know how long I sat there holding that note, letting the truth settle into me like rain into dry earth, realizing how easily distance grows when pride stands between two people, how easily misunderstandings become walls, how time quietly turns love into longing and longing into regret. I left the cafe that day different, not lighter, not heavier, just changed, knowing that sometimes promises are forgotten not because they meant nothing but because life gets loud and people assume silence is rejection. As I walked home, I folded the note carefully and placed it in my pocket, not as a wound but as a reminder that love is fragile, memory is unreliable, and showing up matters, but so does speaking. That was the last year I went to the cafe. But sometimes when I pass by, I still look through the window, half expecting to see him there waiting just like me. And sometimes I hope he is happy wherever he is. Because some promises are not meant to be kept forever. They are meant to teach us how deeply we once cared. After that day, life did not suddenly become clear or gentle, it simply moved on the way it always does, quietly, without asking permission. I stopped marking the date on my calendar, stopped waking up with that familiar heaviness in my chest every year. But some habits do not disappear, they just learn how to hide, and sometimes in the middle of an ordinary afternoon the memory of that cafe would return uninvited, bringing with it the warmth of coffee and the ache of what almost was. I often wondered what his version of the story looked like, whether he sat at the same table, confused, checking his phone, waiting for a message that never came, whether he told. Part of me always wondered if somewhere out there he was doing the same thing, wondering if he was also learning how to let go himself stories to survive the silence, the same way I did, telling himself that I was busy, that I had changed, that maybe I had simply outgrown the promise we once treated like a sacred thing. It is strange how two people can live parallel pain without ever touching it. There were moments when I wanted to run back to that cafe, to leave my own note, to explain everything, to say I was there every year, I never forgot you, I never chose to disappear. But time does not work like that. You cannot rewind misunderstandings. Once they harden into years, you can only carry the lesson forward and hope you do better next time. I tried dating after that, really tried, not the distracted kind where your mind is somewhere else, but the honest kind where you show up and listen and open yourself slowly, carefully, the way someone who has been hurt learns to do again. There were kind people, patient people, people who wanted to know me, and sometimes I let them, but a small quiet part of me always wondered if somewhere out there he was doing the same thing, wondering if he was also learning how to let go. Some nights I dreamed of him, not the way he was at 17, but older, softer edges around his eyes, a tired smile. Conversations in those dreams were simple. We never talked about the promise or the cafe or the years we lost. We just talked about the weather, about books, about how strange life is when it does not turn out the way you expect. And when I woke up, there was no pain, just a calm acceptance that dreams are where unfinished stories go to rest. I learned something important in the years that followed, something nobody teaches you when you are young. Nobody tells you that love is not only about feeling deeply, it is about clarity, it is about asking questions instead of making assumptions, it is about choosing communication over pride, even when your voice shakes, even when you are afraid of what the answer might be. I used to believe that showing up silently was enough, that loyalty meant waiting patiently, that real connections could survive without words. But now I know that silence can sound like abandonment, and waiting without reaching out can feel like being left behind. Sometimes I imagine running into him by accident on a street corner or in a bookstore, both of us reaching for the same shelf, recognizing each other in that slow, uncertain way, smiling politely before realization hits. I imagine us laughing at how dramatic it all feels, how much weight we gave to a single promise when we were just kids. But in those imaginations there is no regret, only warmth, only gratitude that at some point our paths crossed and shaped who we became. Because the truth is, he taught me something precious without ever knowing it. He taught me the value of presence, of speaking up, of not assuming someone knows how much they matter to you. He taught me that love needs action and understanding, not just intention. There are days when I pass a cafe and feel nothing at all, and there are days when a familiar bell sound or the smell of coffee makes my heart pause for just a second, but it no longer hurts the way it used to. It feels more like a quiet nod to a chapter that closed gently rather than being torn away. If I could speak to my younger self sitting at that table year after year, I would tell her this: you did not waste your time, you were not foolish for believing, you were brave for caring deeply in a world that often forgets how. But next time, do not wait in silence, speak, ask, reach out, because love deserves a voice. And if I could speak to him wherever he is, I would say thank you for the promise, even if it broke, thank you for the waiting, even if it was lonely, thank you for teaching me how important it is to meet people where they are, not just where you hope they will be. Some promises fade, some people drift, some stories end without a final conversation, but that does not make them meaningless, it makes them human. And somewhere in the quiet spaces of my life, between the noise and the motion, I carry the memory of a café, a folded note, and a lesson that shaped the way I love. Not with waiting, but with presence. Time continued its gentle, unforgiving walk forward, and I learned how to walk with it instead of standing still waiting for echoes of a past that could no longer answer me. Mornings became quieter in a good way, no longer heavy with expectation, just simple sunlight through curtains, soft routines, a calm I once thought only came from certainty but now knew could also come from acceptance. I began to notice small things again, the way strangers smile without reason, the comfort of familiar streets, the sound of my own breathing when the world slows down enough to hear it. Grief does not always announce itself loudly, sometimes it leaves quietly, taking its sharp edges with it, and what remains is a space where something new can grow. There were moments when I wondered if he ever thought of reaching out after leaving that note, if he ever looked back hoping to see me walk through the door one last time, but those questions no longer demanded answers, they simply passed through my mind like clouds, changing shape then disappearing. I started volunteering at a small community library, the kind of place where time seems softer, where people speak in hushed tones and stories live longer than regrets. I helped organize shelves, recommend books, listen to quiet confessions from strangers who felt safe among words and paper, and I realized how healing it is to be present for others in ways I once wished someone had been present for me. One afternoon, a woman asked me why I always smiled gently, as if I knew something painful but beautiful at the same time. I laughed, surprised by how accurately she had seen me, and I told her, sometimes you learn things the hard way, but you carry them kindly so they do not turn you bitter. She nodded like she understood exactly what I meant. Love came back into my life slowly, not as a storm, not as fireworks, but as a steady warmth through conversations that felt easy, silences that felt safe, someone who asked questions and listened to the answers, someone who showed up not just physically but emotionally, someone who did not assume but communicated even when it was uncomfortable. And every time he did, I felt a quiet gratitude for the lesson that café had taught me. There were days when I wanted to tell him about the promise, about the waiting, about the note. But some stories are not meant to be shared, they belong to the person you were when you needed them, and once they have taught you what they came to teach, they can rest. On the anniversary of that old promise, I found myself walking without realizing it, until I stood once again outside the cafe. The door was different now, the paint fresher, the sign newer, but the bell still sounded the same. When someone walked in, I did not go inside, I just stood there for a moment, smiling softly, thanking the place silently for holding a piece of my heart so gently all those years. I understood then that closure does not always come from answers or apologies. Sometimes it comes from realizing you survived the unanswered questions and became someone wiser because of them. We all carry forgotten promises, not just the ones others make to us, but the ones we make to ourselves, to speak up, to be honest, to choose courage over fear. And if there is one promise I keep now, it is this: I will not let silence speak for me again. The memory of him no longer feels like loss, it feels like a chapter that ended exactly when it needed to, leaving behind words written in invisible ink, shaping every page that followed. And if someday our paths cross again, I will greet him with warmth, not with questions, because some connections are not meant to be repaired, they are meant to be appreciated for what they were. I walk forward now with an open heart, steady steps, and a voice I am no longer afraid to use. There is a quiet strength that comes after you stop waiting for someone else to arrive and start arriving fully for yourself. It does not feel dramatic, it does not announce itself, it simply settles into your bones and stays. I noticed it one morning while tying my shoes, realizing I was not rushing toward or away from anything, I was just living. Life became a series of small, honest moments, shared laughter, unplanned conversations, evenings that did not need fixing or explaining. I learned that love does not have to feel heavy to be meaningful, it can feel calm and still reach deep places inside you. Sometimes when I spoke my truth, even about simple things, I felt a strange gratitude toward the past, toward the silence, toward the misunderstandings, because without them I might never have learned how important my voice was. I might have mistaken patience for love again. I might have waited quietly while slowly disappearing. I think about the promise sometimes not with sadness but with respect. It was born from innocence, from a belief that intentions alone could protect connection, but intentions need direction and care the way fire needs oxygen to stay alive. There are nights when I sit by the window watching city lights flicker, and I imagine all the people waiting somewhere, holding on to promises, wondering if they are alone in it. And I wish I could tell them, this waiting does not make you loyal, silence does not make you strong, speaking does. If he ever rereads his own notes someday, I hope he understands that neither of us failed. We simply grew in different directions without knowing how to call each other back, and that is not a tragedy, it is a lesson many people never learn. I no longer carry the café with me as a place of waiting. It has transformed into a symbol, a reminder of how deeply I can care and how carefully I must communicate that care. Love now feels like choice, not habit, presence, not hope, clarity, not guessing, and when I say I will be there, I mean it with my whole voice, not just my heart. Some stories do not end with reunion, they end with understanding, and sometimes that is the kinder ending. I walk forward holding that understanding gently, knowing that forgotten promises can still shape a beautiful life when you let them teach instead of haunt you. There came a day when I realized I no longer measured time by what was missing but by what was present, and that realization felt like exhaling after holding my breath for years. It was not sudden, it arrived quietly, disguised as peace. I woke up that morning with no memory pulling me backward, no anticipation pulling me forward, just a gentle awareness of being here, fully here, and that was enough. The world did not change, but my way of standing in it did. Conversations felt lighter, choices felt clearer. I stopped rereading old moments, searching for alternate endings, and started trusting that what unfolded did so for a reason, even if I did not understand it at the time. I learned that some people enter your life not to stay but to shape you, and when their role is complete, holding on to them only keeps you from becoming who you are meant to be. And loving someone does not always mean keeping them close, sometimes it means letting the memory soften and settle. There were still moments when a familiar laugh in a crowd or a name spoken unexpectedly made my heart pause, but the pause no longer led to pain, it led to gratitude, because it reminded me that I once felt something real, something deep, something worth remembering. I began writing again, not stories for others but quiet reflections just for myself. Words poured out freely once I stopped censoring them, and in those pages I found pieces of myself I thought I had lost: the hopeful girl, the patient woman, the one who believed in connection even when it hurt. And I forgave her for waiting, because she did the best she could with what she knew. We all do. There is no shame in believing in someone, there is only growth in learning when belief needs conversation to survive. If someone were to ask me now what love means, I would not speak of promises or years or waiting. I would speak of honesty, of courage, of showing up, even when it is uncomfortable, even when your voice shakes. I would say love is asking, "Are you still here?" and listening to the answer. I would say love is choosing clarity over assumption again and again. Somewhere out there he is living his own life, carrying his own lessons, and I wish him well, not because I am healed but because I am whole. And that is the difference. Healing closes wounds, wholeness accepts the scars. As the seasons change and the years continue to layer themselves gently on my life, I move forward with an open heart and a steady voice, no longer waiting in silence, no longer afraid of being seen. The promise may have been forgotten, but the lesson was not. And it lives on in every word I speak honestly. In every moment I choose presence. In every love I meet with courage. With time I began to notice how easily people misunderstand each other, how often silence fills the spaces where words are too fragile to stand alone, and I started choosing my words carefully, not to protect myself from hurt but to protect connection. I stopped assuming people could read my intentions. I stopped believing that love could survive on feelings alone. I learned to ask the difficult questions, to say I miss you, to say I need you, to say I am confused, instead of retreating into quiet endurance. And every time I did, it felt like rewriting the ending of a story that once hurt me. There were moments when fear returned, whispering that speaking might push someone away, but I had learned that silence does the same thing, only slower, only quieter, only deeper, and I chose courage instead. I saw the difference it made in the people around me, how conversations became softer, how misunderstandings dissolved before they had time to grow into years, how presence replaced guessing and certainty replaced waiting. Sometimes I wondered if he ever learned the same lesson, if he ever realized that waiting without reaching out was its own kind of disappearance, but those thoughts no longer lingered, they passed through like memories that had done their work. I think of him now not as someone who left, but as someone who walked beside me for a chapter, teaching me the cost of silence and the value of voice. Life is kinder when you stop demanding answers from the past and start offering honesty to the present. There is a freedom in releasing the need to be remembered exactly the way you remember others, a freedom in accepting that everyone carries a different version of the same story and none of them are wrong. I am no longer the girl who sat at the café hoping time would stand still. I am the woman who knows that love must move and speak and breathe. And if ever I make a promise now, I make it with words and actions aligned, knowing that memory alone is fragile but intention spoken aloud has weight. The forgotten promise no longer feels forgotten, it feels fulfilled in a different way, transformed into wisdom carried forward, quietly shaping every choice I make. And that is how some stories truly end, not with reunion, not with apology, but with understanding. There are days now when I feel an overwhelming sense of gratitude, not for what stayed, but for what passed through my life, gently leaving behind clarity instead of emptiness. I understand now that not everything meant to last was meant to leave nothing behind. I watch people in cafes sometimes the way I once did, sitting alone or together, eyes full of hope or distraction. And I wonder how many silent promises are being made in those moments, how many of them will be kept, and how many will become lessons instead. I no longer judge the younger version of myself for believing so deeply she loved honestly, and that kind of love is never something to regret, it is something to honor, even when it does not lead where you expected. There is a quiet confidence that comes with knowing you can survive disappointment without becoming closed, without turning hard, without losing the softness that makes connection possible. I have learned that the heart does not need guarantees, it needs truth, and when truth is shared, even endings can feel respectful. The world continues to offer new beginnings every day in subtle ways, a conversation that lingers, a shared smile, a moment of understanding, and I meet them without fear because I trust myself now to speak, to ask, to clarify. And in doing so I have built connections that feel alive, not fragile, not dependent on memory alone, but rooted in presence. Sometimes I imagine the cafe empty at night, chairs, stacked floors, clean, the table where I once waited wiped clean of all those years, and I smile knowing that even though the physical space has changed, the meaning it held lives on inside me, reshaped, refined, no longer heavy. I carry forward a promise now, not to wait in silence, not to assume, not to disappear quietly hoping to be found, but to stand fully present and let my voice be heard. This promise I keep daily in small ways, in conversations, in relationships, in the way I show up for myself. And if ever I feel myself retreating into old habits, into quiet endurance, I remember the girl who waited year after year, and I gently choose differently. Not because she was wrong, but because she deserved clarity. And so do I. I think about how time changes people and how it changes the meaning of what we once held sacred. What once felt urgent now feels gentle, what once caused longing now brings quiet reflection, and I realize that growing is not about forgetting, it is about understanding. Sometimes I close my eyes and remember the cafe, the smell of coffee, the wooden tables, the worn edges of a chair, and I feel a tenderness for that time, for the younger me who believed in promises with all her heart, who waited without question, who hoped without knowing. I realize now that waiting is not weakness, waiting is a kind of faith, but faith alone is not enough. Presence matters, action matters, clarity matters, and sometimes the hardest lesson is learning to balance hope with reality and expectation with understanding. I think about him sometimes, wondering if he remembers my face, my laugh, my words the way I imagined him waiting too, and I hope he has learned the same things I have. Hope he has grown in kindness, in presence, in courage, even if our paths never cross again. Love in my life now feels quieter, stronger, softer, and more deliberate. It is not the drama of missed meetings or folded notes. It is steady presence, honesty expressed clearly, a hand held without assumption, a voice offered without fear. I carry the memory of the forgotten promise not as a wound, not as a regret, but as a quiet teacher shaping how I speak, how I listen, how I love. And in that carrying there is a freedom, a lightness, a deep knowing that the past cannot control the present unless I let it. I no longer fear endings because I have learned that every ending teaches something, every silence carries meaning, every absence is an invitation to show up fully when it matters. The girl who waited at the café year after year still exists in me, but she exists differently now, wiser, more patient, but also more assertive, more alive. I am grateful for her, for the lessons she endured, for the courage she had even when she did not know the full story. And I walk forward with that courage now, intentionally, kindly, softly, strong. Knowing that some promises are not about keeping someone else in your life, they are about keeping yourself true. And keeping your heart capable of caring without fear. I have come to understand that life is a series of moments strung together, some bright, some dim, some full of laughter, some heavy with quiet, and in between those moments we carry memories that shape us and teach us, and sometimes the most important lessons come from what we cannot change. I no longer think about the café as a place of waiting or the note as a symbol of loss. I think of them as markers of growth, reminders that I can endure, that I can feel deeply, and that I can still choose love even when the past has hurt me. There is a stillness now that comes from having been through disappointment and learning to navigate it gracefully, a calm that is not numbness but clarity, a presence that feels steady because it is earned through experience and reflection. Sometimes I see young people in cafes laughing and making promises, and I smile softly, knowing that they do not yet understand that promises are more than words, they are commitments of presence and communication, and sometimes life teaches that lesson in ways that are tender and sometimes in ways that are painful. And I have learned to honor both. I have learned that showing up matters, but showing up without speaking does not always protect connection, that love is expressed not only in faith but in action, that memory is precious but clarity is essential. I carry the memory of waiting not as regret, but as wisdom, not as a weight, but as a gift, not as a chain, but as wings. Because every year I returned I was practicing resilience, every year I returned I was learning patience, every year I returned I was discovering the depth of my own heart and the importance of voice. And now I walk forward with that knowledge embedded in every gesture, every word, every breath. The forgotten promise has become a guide, not a prison, a teacher, not a wound, a reminder, not of absence but of presence. I have forgiven the silence, I have embraced the lessons, I have loved and been loved in different ways, and I continue to love with intention, clarity, and courage. And I know now that life is not measured by the promises kept by others, but by the promises we keep to ourselves, by the honesty we carry, by the presence we offer, by the courage we choose. And in that understanding there is peace, there is freedom, there is love. And that is how the story of waiting ends, not with reunion, not with apology, not with despair, but with understanding, with growth, with quiet courage, and a heart open enough to meet the world fully present.